right, thank you so much for staying with Daybreak. You know now the international flights have resumed. Initially, there were 11 countries that were allowed to come into the country without necessarily being subjected to isolation or quarantine for 14 days. But they must have a PCR COVID-19 negative certificate, show proof that they don't have any underlying symptoms, no fever, no coughs, no symptoms at all, then they'll be allowed into the country. There's been a bit of a quagmire on this situation because before then, environmentalists say that the carbon emissions had actually reduced and Mother Nature was having a good time. But let's make heads and tails of this conversation. Joining me now, Mr. John Kioli is the chair, Kenya Climate Change Working Group. Thank you so much for making time for us. So, Mr. John, let's just get straight into it. What was the impact on the environment after COVID-19, especially on the carbon emissions?
Yeah, thank you very much, Trevor, for having me in this leading TV station in the country and also regionally. I want to say that COVID-19 had a huge impact, especially in lowering pollution and what you can call the carbon emissions or indoor gases. We dropped by almost 8%. This was a big drop in terms of carbon monoxide and nitrous oxide, especially from motor vehicles, industries locked down. And amazingly, for the first time since, I think, Second World War, the aviation industry also stopped to close to 95%. So what that means, Trevor, is that we gained in terms of cutting emissions and our ambitions by significant number, because if you look at the industries closed, if you look at also the motor vehicles on a lockdown and also industries, there was a huge impact in terms of cutting emissions and the bigger ambitions of a climate change scenario. In Kenya, we anticipate to cut down about 143 million tons of carbon emissions equivalent. So we are hoping by 2030, this COVID-19 will have impacted positively in terms of cutting emissions and accelerating our ambition of cutting 143 million tons of carbon emission, which is 30% of what we emit as a country.
Yeah. Mr. Kioli, we know now that most respiratory illnesses are caused by pollution. And I know you're not a medical doctor, but from the research that you've conducted, is there proof that other respiratory illnesses have sort of gone lower during this COVID-19 infection period?
Mr. Trevor, you can say that again. In the world, close to 3.8 million people die through indoor gases related diseases. And 3.8 million annually, Trevor, is not a small number. And you can see people dying from stroke, pulmonary diseases, lung cancer, and children are also suffering from lower respiration infections. And all this is coming from different areas like the use of charcoal. You must be aware that as a country, 82% of the charcoal that is produced within the rural areas ends up in Nairobi and other big towns. And what happens is that the emission that is emitted by use of charcoal and also firewood is also used at around 14%. And also paraffin in stoves is also at around 13%. So when you look at all these metrics, you see that we don't have much choice. And people are still using, the lanterns that are using paraffin. And the dangers are quite huge. And we are having people having indoor air pollution. And thousands, if not millions of people in the country are actually affected by use of what we can call biomass energy, which is close to 70% used in Kenya. What that means, Trevor, is that if we can bring down these numbers, we can be able to sort of get more people not dying of these sort of diseases. And this is why we are saying there's a connection between energy and COVID-19, because COVID-19 is also having almost a similar trajectory, because it's touching issues of respiratory. And again, if you look at this sort of energy which is not clean, again, it's touching the respiratory. So we are seeing there's a nexus between energy and COVID-19.
Okay. And you mentioned 3.8 million annual deaths in the world. Those are colossal numbers. Do we have figures for maybe Africa? And how come it's not been given that much attention? Because those are very high figures you're talking about.
You must be aware, Trevor, as I mentioned, that we are still struggling with bringing down clean energy. I mean, bringing down what we call fossil and also biomass energy in Kenya. As I had mentioned, more than 70% of people are using charcoal and firewood in their houses to cook. And this 3.8 million, Trevor, I'm not surprised, because the media may not be so much aware, because there's a disconnect between the issues that civil society are advocating and the media. And we are reaching out to media fraternity to be partners in advocating for green energy, because media, again, occupies a very important position in this country to be able to amplify what we are saying as a civil society. So we are partnering together with the media in workshops. Like tomorrow, we'll have a major workshop bringing together media editors and many media houses to talk about issues of energy, issues of climate change, and how they can be made better in terms of amplifying. Because remember today, if there was an event of energy in one hotel and another one of politicians, I'm sure you'd run to the politicians because you'll have it news in the evening. So how can we make news in media in terms of energy? How can we make energy a topical issue to be reported? And that's where you'll find the issues of 3.8 million annually, globally, of people dying of respiratory diseases that are from issues of charcoal, paraffin, and firewood.
So, Mr. Kioli, based on what you've just said, then, was it a good idea for the engines to roar back to life? Because we've just commissioned international flights, and there was a long lull there, but now they're all back. Was it a good idea to bring them back without having put in the measures for green energy, for example?
Trevor, financial markets had dropped. Our Kenya shilling also dropped. Millions of people were stranded. The economy came to a stall, not only in Kenya, but globally. We must realize that COVID also affected our economy negatively. And if you look at how we can resuscitate, is one of the issues I want to thank the president is opening the markets, opening the economy. And, you cannot shy away from opening the economy, but how can we open the economy and realize that, there are lessons learned from issues of COVID? One of the things we must realize, Mr. Trevor, is that we learned hard lessons, like we can meet without physically going to a venue. And this was very clear in terms of Zoom meetings, Skype meetings, and other various applications that you can actually meet without going physically to that person. And these are things we can borrow from. The other thing is also, if you realize that the parcel industry, where you can send parcels, also developed. We were wasting a lot of money, creating a lot of CO2 emissions by traveling individually to be able to drop a parcel or do other things. We have realized through COVID-19 that as a country, we can gain a lot of things by using this. And if you look at COVID-19 and the lesson learned in terms of green energy, we have an opportunity here, Trevor, of now the government coming up with a stimulus package in terms of COVID-19, recovery plan. We are saying that if the government really is keen on issues of energy, then energy becomes one of the stimulus package layout that we can have all the boreholes now running on solar. We can have a stimulus package to be given to people to resuscitate markets. Because once you put a solar, plant in an area where there was no energy, in an off-grid area, then that market resuscitates. That market opens the economy. That market starts having salons. That market starts having portion mills, which are run by that kind of energy. So what we are saying that as the government plans to open up post-COVID, we need a stimulus package, which one of the elements becomes issues of energy. And we think, or I think, this could be one of the areas because once the planes start rolling, once the other economy starts going up, then we must use what we call the lesson learned from COVID. And one of them is, well, energy can be one of the healing economy. And one of the things is that it's also mirroring to the Big Four agenda of creating employment and also creating a universal health coverage.
Okay. And Mr. Kioli, as we wind up on this conversation, what would it take to overhaul the entire system and ensure that Mother Nature survives and so do the people?
I think as a country, and what the geothermal, the Kenya Generation Company is producing in terms of thermal energy, about 253 megawatts, is something we need to look at. How can we start believing in green energy? How can we start bringing those numbers down? How can we start bringing the numbers of solar up, the numbers of wind up? As it is, we are using about 85%, clean energy in terms of generation because as a country, we are generating through hydro, geothermal, and wind energy. How can we bring the numbers up in terms of renewable energy? If you look at our Energy Act of 2019, Section 74 outlines the issues of rolling out of renewable energy. But this needs to permeate through the counties. Counties need to believe in renewable energy. Counties need to put that in their CIDPs. Counties need to have a Marshall Plan to be able to navigate and make sure that energy is affordable, energy is renewable, energy can be as an issue of equity. Everybody must have energy as a right. Because if you only connect me to electricity, and then I cannot afford electricity to be paying monthly bills, then it becomes a challenge, Trevor. But I think as a country, we need to turn into renewable energy, and we can.
All right. Mr. John Kioli, thank you so much for speaking to us this morning. John Kioli is the chairperson, Kenya Climate Change Working Group, and he's given us very grim statistics there. We lose about 3.8 million people annually, globally, because of pollution-related complications there. Let's bring in someone who isn't in the tourism sector who doesn't really think that we should have closed down the airlines for a bit. Now they're back. Is this the lifeline that they expected? Joining me now from Mombasa is one Mohamed Hersi. He's a chairperson, Kenya Tourism Federation. Mr. Hersi, thank you so much for making time for us this morning. So is this the lifeline that the tourism sector really wanted?
Good morning, Trevor. Yes, without air accessibility, international tourism, even domestic, was going to be a big challenge. So the fact that now you are able to fly into Kenya and out of Kenya, that is very, very crucial. And any country that is going to be left behind to decide whether they're going to accept international flights or not will be left, chasing. So it is the beginning. We have a long way to go because the COVID crisis is still with us and is still with us in the world. So it will take time. So there has to be a lot of, we have to be very, very patient about it, yeah.
So, Hersi, what trends are we witnessing so far? Are you seeing a resurgence in bookings, the ones that were cancelled? Are they now being given priority over new ones? What is the strategy going forward?
The thing is that we had virtually lost half of the year to begin with, and we had just started receiving cancellations, what we call the forward bookings that we had received. That is bookings slated for, August, September, October. So some of them are holding back and hoping that they will be able to be on the list that is being revised by our government, and they will be able to come to Kenya. So there are a lot of factors in play, but the fact that we have our own national carrier and we've got many airlines that have shown interest and actually committed to fly to the destination, then that is some light at the end of the tunnel for us. And that means we may be able to some bit, salvage what is left of the safari peak season. The peak season for safari is normally August, September, October, and hopefully we may get some, the tail end of it. And but getting back to where we were, that will take a long time.
Are you seeing a difference in the clientele so far? Because those with there's a category of the older generation who are now not planning to travel, those who people refer to as the old money. What is the plan to ensure that you now attract the younger clientele who may not be that susceptible to COVID-19?
I think that's a perception, and what you realize is that we have a mix. For the past, 5-10 years, we've had a very good mix. You get people in their 30s coming on a safari and going on a lengthy safari. Obviously, the large percentage is normally people above 60. But even when you look at the booking that is coming back and people are showing interest, people above 50, people above 60, and very few, above 70. And the biggest source market when it comes to the international market for us is the US and, of course, Europe, Canada, which is in North America. But with the pandemic, the virus, spreading in the US, and obviously for them having a challenge flying through Europe, and we have not started our flights to New York. Hopefully, Kenya Airways will be able to do it earlier than October that they had planned. Then it means it gets a bit difficult for them to find their way to Kenya. But it's still too early to determine the market class, or rather the segment that is actually coming to Kenya. It's too early. When you look at the people who are coming to Kenya at the moment, a lot of them are actually the expatriates working in Kenya who are stuck out there, or residents who are stuck out there, or even citizens who left the country for some reason and were stuck somewhere, and then they're all coming back now. So it's actually not tourists per se, but hopefully with time, we hope to start seeing, tourists coming back. But again, the biggest challenge is the COVID-19 certificate, the guidelines, the protocols. It is not easy. It's a challenge, but we have to live with it.
Okay, Hersi, I want to play a soundbite. I spoke to the tourism CS, Najib Balala, some times back on this same issue of tourism and the reviving the tourism industry. This is what he had to say.
We charge international prices as if we are in the international space. Yeah, definitely we have a unique product that is safari, the nature, Africa, yeah, but definitely we cannot overprice ourselves. And this is the problem I have with the industry. We have overpriced ourselves. And if you look at Kenya, even the people who come to Kenya, people come once in a lifetime. Why do we have to get people once in a lifetime? Because it's very expensive to come to Kenya. One reason is a long-haul destination, so the biggest chunk of the cost goes to air transport. The second one is about the uniqueness and the specialized product that we have, which I have no problem. But you see, how many people will come to our country? We'll have small numbers, very expensive, but the economy and the population will not benefit much, because we need mass employment for our country. So we need to make it affordable. I don't say make it cheap, but make it affordable. Even for Kenyans ourselves, like now, everybody wants to leave Nairobi or leave Mombasa, and people are traumatized with this pandemic. They want a break and they want to breathe. But then at what price? They'll prefer to sit in their gardens or go to Ushago in their farms and then enjoy themselves as families, rather of going and discovering and giving businesses to those lodges or hotels in the coast.
Yeah.
So these are the challenges we have because the pricing is not right for the Kenyan market yet.
Thank you, Trevor.
Are we overpriced, Mr. Hersey?
What I would like to say is that the issue of price is a big debate. And the answer, are we overpriced? The answer is no. We are not overpriced. We have very many factors that come into play. And you realize that in the past 10 years, Kenyan hotels have really come up with good rates, for the domestic market. The only challenge and the biggest challenge we face with the domestic market is a very seasonal business. They all want to travel during Easter school holidays. They all want to travel during August school holidays. And then December, where the demand completely outstrips the supply. And let's go back to the basics of economics of demand and supply. But when you look at any other time of the year, Kenya is still the only destination that is still giving a resident and a non-resident rate. Many hotels are still doing that. Yet it is a practice that is being is a practice that many hotels globally, are stopping using. But it's to the benefit of the overall resident and our citizens, because the rates that we give, for instance, today, a good 4-star all-inclusive resort at the Kenya coast will give you something like $65, dollars per person sharing, which is 13,000 shillings for all-inclusive. And somebody would like to compare, so let's say, with Dubai, where they're giving you bed and breakfast, or sometimes even bed only, and you have to pay for your breakfast separate. I think it's important we also compare an apple for an apple. Obviously, there are places that are quite high. Some of the boutique outfits are high, and so is South Africa, so is Namibia, and many other places. But to outright say that we are overpriced, I think it's a little bit on the extreme. And the more we repeat and the more we talk about it, it means that people will start believing it. Actually, that's not the case. And I'm also glad that Waziri has mentioned the component of air travel. The cost is very high because we are long-haul destination. We are, 8 hours, 9 hours away from Europe. So people getting here, you have to pay a fortune for that. And you realize that close to 50, 60%, even sometimes of the component of your holiday is actually air travel. And then number two, for the international market, you start adding vaccinations and tablets. For instance, malaria. If you're a family of 4, you're looking at $200. Now add COVID-19 certificate. Those are all now challenges that we'll be facing to attract people here. People compare us with Egypt and many other places. When you look at Egypt and you look at even next to Ethiopia, the cost of power in those countries are 6 times cheaper than Kenya. So we need to start thinking about the input in doing business. So are all other industries also complaining. But also, when you look at the taxation aspect, every 100 shillings that you pay us, 28 shillings actually goes to the government and service charge for the staff. Then we normally say that, staff cost and payroll is cheap. It is not anymore. The wages in Kenya, we have a very vibrant union that we work with. And for the past, 10 years, every other year, we've actually signed between 8 and 11% salary increase. So today, a waiter plus service charge actually will find it better to work in Kenya than to go and work in Dubai. So Kenya is no longer a destination where you say that, wage aspect is a cheap destination. It is not. So the cost, the inputs is equally high. And those are the things that we need to deal with. But when it comes to the safari circuit, let's face it, Masai Mara is 17 times smaller than a place like Serengeti. So the demand is completely so high that you're not able, to offer a lower price when it comes to August, September, October. And at the end of the day, the reality is that we don't want the whole world here during the migration. If anything, we've always felt that in the last couple of years that Mara was overutilized. We have other parks, and this is where the challenge comes in also for Kenya Tourism Board and ourselves as private sector and Waziri that we promote other destinations in the country. You know, we've got Amboseli, we've got Savo East, Savo West that is underutilized, the northern part of the country, the western part of the country. You talk about Ruma. I'm glad that Waziri went out there the other day. I'm glad the entire western circuit, fantastic roads. I call it, you know, the Riviera. You look at that region of Nyanza, beautiful. You go to northern part, Turkana, and all those places, Great Rift on the northern side. There are many places that we can sell in these countries so that people just don't come to the coast and don't just end up in Masai Mara.
Okay. But how are you coping with the Ministry of Health guidelines? Because we know now Tanzania, for example, are not allowed to come in here without 14 days isolation. We share some of our tourists with them. And also we know that the hotel industry cannot test their workers every other day and they can be exposed at any given point. So having a COVID-19 free certificate doesn't necessarily mean that you've not been exposed. What is your take on the Ministry of Health guidelines to deal with COVID-19, especially in the hotel industry?
The guidelines by the Ministry of Health, we worked with them very, very closely. But I think the most critical part is that also we need to be a little bit realistic. The fact that now we've given a list of the countries that are allowed into the country, we need to make sure that we respect the list that we've issued. And somebody getting a COVID-free certificate from one of these countries, whether it's UK, whether it's US, is not easy because some of those countries are actually do not test people who are not unwell, you know, unless you have all the signs. Then they would like to confirm. Otherwise, they've got very limited number of tests that they want to carry out, or rather their kits. So when somebody has gone to the length of getting the certificates and they land here, then we need to make it easy for them. After all, it's very hard to test, everybody. But the fact somebody is holding that certificate, I think it should be able to count, and then we allow them, entry, unless they show clear signs that they are unwell, and obviously we need to make sure that they go into quarantine. But we hope that the list will be expanded in the coming days so that we are open to more people. That's very, very crucial. But I think it's a good start. And we'll continue working with both Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Transport, and of course our own ministry and our CS. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking to us this morning. Mohamed Hersi, there, Chairman, Kenya Tourism Federation.